deficit in transparency in the functioning of the government. Yes, say editors who believe that by diminishing access to information to journalists, the process of democratic functioning in an age of openness and transparency is being affected. What does the government hope to achieve by cutting down access to journalists and at pretty much all levels, from the Prime Minister's office downwards? Well, joining us now to debate this, Nalin Kohli, spokesperson of the BJP, Abhishek Manu Singhvi, Rajya Sabha MP and spokesperson of the Congress Party, Kumar Ketkar, the senior journalist, and we'll also be joined by Shopun Dasgupta as well. Nalin, let me come to you first, because the big concern at this stage, and let me quote from this letter of the Editors Guild, it says, by delaying establishment of media interface, for example, in the Prime Minister's office, and restricting access to ministers and bureaucrats, the government seems to be on a path that runs counter to norms of democratic discourse and accountability. How do you respond?
Well, there are many aspects to it, and I have, of course, personally traversed both sides of the scale. I've, been in the media myself, handled it in terms for my party. Now I'm here representing it. So I think we need to look at it, each thing in its merits. First of all is with regards to whether the Prime Minister would like to keep a media advisor or not is really the prerogative of the Prime Minister. I don't think it is necessary for him to really go about it, because you've had a precedent. There's no requirement in terms of the work. Mr. Modi himself also, if you would just look back over the last decade, over a decade, he really hasn't been someone who has interacted too much with the media. There are occasions and he does interact. It's not as if he keeps away, but then as and when, it's not on a day-to-day basis. I think he expects the people who are entrusted with that job to do it. The third is about whether information is being blocked out. I think that's an allegation which is not correct, because information that has to be given is given out. You have a ministry on it, you have PIB, you have the PTI, you have all the various agencies that do report. Ministers come out with their press conferences.
Nalin, I'm glad you mentioned it.
The ministers,
let me just quote.
Let me finish.
I'm interrupting you with a purpose.
Okay.
I want to quote from First Post, who wrote, "The Modi government has become the competitor of the national media. It possesses both the message and the medium. So you pass the message through social media and that is the end of it. You bypass journalists looking for access and information. We are a democracy at the end of the day. Surely journalists should be able to ask people questions at the highest level."
I think so. Therefore, you need to hear me out for 2 minutes, Vishnu.
Yeah.
Because I think we need to look at it in totality. The Editors Guild that has come out, and absolutely with respect, there's nothing that the Editors Guild is saying that one would take offense to, because that's how it is. Each one of the wings of or the four pegs of our democracy are entitled to their views. But as I was saying, there are ministerial conferences, there are ministerial press meets, there are occasions to meet up. That's one part of it. Now let me give you a few examples that are equally real from the other side. Today, in today's point, when you have so many commercial, public, private channels, I can tell you as a spokesperson, sometimes I'm expected to give the same bite 5 times separately, because each channel would like to show it as an exclusive from their reporter. So which means it's not only duplication, this is pentaplication of effort, as an example. So therefore, that's one. 2 is, this government is focusing on trying to do things and announce it, rather than just speak about it. So, and probably as things start moving down the line, when the effort of making the change has started falling in gear, it is possible that you might be finding there is a more greater amount of interaction, because people may have done the little bits that are expected to do in terms of their work focuses.
Okay, let me
my last point. Then you can open it up further. My last point. My last point is just my last point, because then I'm really done. Then we can debate it further. So my last point is, the model that has preceded before this, which was in an election mode, and just prior to the election mode, you've often seen the media being in terms of one ministry trying to get information across about what's happening in another ministry. So that was, I would call it, the gala day of a media enterprise. But that's not how you see it at how, when there's a change of regime, when work starts becoming the focus. So I think it's a different period.
Okay, Dr. Singhvi, they say they want work to happen. They don't want too many journalists snooping around, because that just stops the process of work being done.
Stop journalists from snooping around. Sorry, Dr. Singhvi.
Yes, there are direct assaults possible on the freedom of speech expression, which is now encapsulated as an additional freedom called press freedom under article of the Constitution. That's about 50 years old in terms of case law, and there can be a direct assault which is easy to challenge, go to court. But there are much more insidious, indirect manners of curbing the press freedom. And you are now seeing, according to me, post-May, an unprecedented new set of very, very implied subtle techniques to actually throttle or reduce the area of really genuine free speech and exchange of views. First and foremost, it has become a one-way street. In fact, just like you recently just heard, it is like the government speaking from the mountaintop. You as the media must sit at the valley bottom receiving it. It's a one-way street, it's unilateral, there is no questioning, there is no subjecting yourself to public scrutiny. Very, very conveniently, it has become one way. And that obviously has repercussions on accountability. But more importantly, it is interesting that you have very, very nice new rules which never heard of. Only state-owned media shall have first access. Now in this day of 24/7, for so many years now, decades, India is proud to have this 24/7 in many ways, with all its problems, with all its negatives. To suggest that only state-owned media shall have access, to suggest that social media communication is the only method. So for the first time, social media is ahead of visual media, it is ahead of print media. These are very, very clever and unprecedented techniques. The Prime Minister chooses not to have a single press conference. Foreign tours are truncated, highly selective government media. The press, we are just told 2 minutes ago, is actually a hindrance to real work. This is the first new definition of press freedom I've heard under 19(1)(a), that if you have real press freedom, questioning, accountability, it hinders work because you are wasting time answering some questions of the press. I am told also that in certain ministries there are now mandatory CCTV cameras to monitor and control what press people are doing in particular. Now this is something which I mean it's not Indian culture, it's not happened in India before. You may be media savvy, you may not be media savvy, you may do more or less, but this kind of very, very clever, subtle methodologies are absolutely unprecedented, and they are ultimately designed to reduce governance in India to a very narrow, dictatorial, unilateral, single person Gujarat model of rule. And I don't know at all whether it will last long enough at the center.
Okay, Nalin, I'll let you respond in a moment because I want to go across to Kumar Ketkar as well. As an editor, Mr. Ketkar, what are your big problems? Nalin, I'll come to you next.
Well, actually, I'm surprised because I'm sure Nalin Kohli must be remembering the days of emergency, and I presume that he must be against emergency and supporting press freedom at that point. And every statement that he made just now was made at that point of time by the people who ran the emergency. Like, government is doing its work, media is being informed, media is being told what decisions government has taken, media has been told about what they are supposed to finish. Where is the question of media seeking more questions and asking more questions and seeking more answers? Or perhaps Nalin Kohli would have been absolutely fit in Soviet Union or Brezhnev, where government is to do something, government is to give single point information to the media. Where was the question of freedom of media? When Gorbachev came, suddenly media realized that press freedom means much more. So I think what Nalin Kohli is doing is exactly following the rules of emergency that were developed at that time. But at that time also, let me tell you, Som, I was a journalist in emergency, and people in the ministry were not having CCTV camera, perhaps technology was not advanced at that time, but people could meet ministers, people could meet bureaucrats, people could have access to politicians across, people could have access to politicians in the opposition as well as in ruling party, those opposition people who were not in the jail, but there was far more access than it is today. And today we talk in terms of democracy, access to media, access to social media, and in effect, what editors are told is that what you will do is being informed to you. Where is the question of you asking me a counter question? So I think Nalin Kohli would have been absolutely a perfect information broadcasting minister in place of V.C. Shukla in emergency.
Nalin, I'll let you answer all of those questions.
I have the flow. So I'll go one by one. Dr. Singhvi raised one or two points which I wanted to just bring on into notice. He was talking about, traveling on the plane with the Prime Minister. There's a capacity of, I think, if I recall correctly, about 35 or 40. That's about it. And of course, the media is far larger than that. Now, already PTI or organizations that do not advertise per se, I mean, PTI doesn't depend on advertisements, they depend on subscription. ANI is a news agency, everyone gets it well. And then you've got the state media, which is, of course, the state media. All of them travel. So this is not any kind of a Soviet model, as Mr. Ketkar would like to believe.
Why is it that all other media has been thrown out?
All of them.
No, but Nalin, why is it that all other media has been thrown out?
PTI is subsidized. PTI is subsidized by the government. PTI is dependent on government.
May I just finish
PTI
my
does not depend only on subscription.
May I just finish my point?
PTI does not depend.
Let me, 1 minute,
no,
hold
but
on.
PTI does not depend only on subscription.
May I finish my point?
Go ahead.
I heard very patiently Mr. Ketkar, and I'm going to come to his points last. So let's go one by one. As I was pointing out, all the media is there after all. Now, in any case, as far as I can count, there are a few hundred television channels. Now, out of those few hundred television channels, if you look at a camera and a correspondent,
it's done on a
the bare
rotation
minimum,
basis. It
you
always
only take
was.
15 people, and you can't even
it was
take.
done on a
Hold
rotation
on.
basis.
In that
Now
order.
there is no press conference of the Prime Minister on the
I've
aircraft
also been
either.
part of that. I understand that, not on the plane itself, but yes, I've been part of the media, so I understand what you're saying. However, now that, as I said, everyone is still covering. There's no restriction of access in terms of it or information, as Mr. Ketkar would like us to believe. Now let's get down to what Mr. Ketkar was saying. Well, I was a child in the emergency, so I had to read about it much later, Mr. Ketkar. And the advantage of debating with you is whether there is someone from the Congress party, Mr. Ketkar, or not. Since you took my name so often, you speak exactly like a Congress spokesperson. I've said it before, and I have no hesitation saying it again. You may be the editor of a respected journal, but your point of view has always been
anti-BJP. I'm referring to emergency.
And
emergency was in Congress rule.
I do not look like
I'm
VC
referring to
Shukla.
emergency.
I will not be up to my deathbed like Mr. VC Shukla ever. Much as you may hope to finally find a parallel within the BJP, I doubt you're going to find that. And certainly you're not going to find a parallel to the emergency, which I'm sure you remember, since you covered it too. You will never see a parallel of the emergency in this country. Thankfully, thank God. And that's what people like us, whom you consider as the VC Shukla, will fight till our end.
We've got Chopun Dasgupta who's joined us now. I just wanted to ask Mr. Dasgupta this. In social media, on Twitter, the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, has 60 lakh followers. 60 lakh followers. So the argument could be raised, why does he need the electronic media? Why does he necessarily need the print media if he's got people on Twitter and people who are retweeting, and therefore if he has a message, he will give the message? This entire definition of traditional media is changing. He doesn't need it. So where does that leave us?
No, Vishnu, I'm sorry, I may have missed an earlier part of the discussion. I don't think it's a question of who needs what. There is a role for the traditional media. There is definitely a growing role, a growing importance of the social media. I think really the problem which seems to have arisen at present, and which was articulated by the Editors Guild, is that there seems to be a trade union ganging up of the traditional media, of the mainstream media as it's referred to in the social media, to have a monopoly of access. And I think what has happened at present is that it's not that access is barred, but a certain privileges have been taken away. And I could recount that there are two reasons why the media in particular feels miffed. One, of course, as I've heard it, was the usual one as to why they are not being allowed to accompany the Prime Minister inside the aircraft. That's the first one. And the second one, which I think is a far more pressing issue, which is the media is miffed because they have somehow been deprived of a role in the decision-making process. And I make this with a great deal of deliberately, because in the past, what had happened was that apart from reporting what took place, the media had become players in the decision-making process. Now Mr. Modi appears to have cut them out from that. And this was a grave distortion which took place in the media. And I think It is that which has offended a lot of people. Now the question which is there, why is there no interface between the Prime Minister's office and the media? This is perhaps one of the most astonishing suggestions. What you're suggesting is, why isn't there a spin doctor who's actually there for the media? Now in the West we've been told that spin doctors constitute the greatest distortion, because they actually package the news and now when you're getting raw information, the complaint is, why isn't there no packaging? And if there is packaging, then we can actually go and attack the packaging rather than
raw
the
information is
so there is a lot of raw information
there isn't raw
available
information
in the public domain.
But that's just the point, that
the raw information is not being it's not being spoon-fed.
No, you cannot access bureaucrats in the same manner. You cannot access ministers in the same manner. One of the instructions of the Prime Minister after he came to power was, do not speak to the media when you don't need to.
Of course you can access every minister.
It's not that easy anymore.
Come on, you can access every minister who chooses to give access. Now it's not that it's not a right.
No, it may not be the right, but is it not a fact, Mr. Dasgupta, that bureaucrats have been told,
there are others may not, who not be.
Bureaucrats have been told that they cannot speak to the media. Ministers have been told, get on with the business.
Bureaucrats have been told. Bureaucrats.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's
so therefore journalists cannot access bureaucrats.
We operate by the Westminster system of the faceless and nameless bureaucrats. The bureaucrats should not be given access, because that's the whole point. The media is